This is the Skip Bayless Show, brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. I want to address President Smith, as in my friend, my brother, Stephen A. Smith, saying he might just have to run for president of the United States, not for mayor or governor or senator, for POTUS. My friend Stephen A. He said over the weekend that many powerful people in Washington are all but begging him to run for president, all but demanding he run for president. So now he must strongly consider, he said, running for president. And my reaction is, good for Stephen A. If a primary requirement for a president in today's America is being telegenic, then Stephen A. Smith was born to be president of the United States. Stephen A., trust me on this, is more gifted on television than anyone I have ever worked with. Anyone, not even close. And I've worked with a whole lot of people over the last 35 years in sports television, including about 25 of those years working very closely with Stephen A. Smith, debating Stephen A. Smith on a daily basis. Greatest gift of gab I have ever encountered on television belongs to Stephen Anthony Smith. Trust me. Now understand, I never ever lost a single sports debate to Stephen A. Smith because I'm smarter about sports than he is, but man, he always made me work because of all of his verbosity, his verbal wizardry, the verbal behind the back, between the legs that he could throw at me, his creating and coining words and phrases on the fly, off the cuff, on live national TV. Man, I over-prepared for all of our sports debates. This man just sat down and wordsmithed me into knots. Stephen A. Wordsmith. Half the time, I don't think he had any idea where he was actually going with his argument. I think he actually surprised himself with what started coming out of his mouth. And suddenly, I'm listening to the Gettysburg Address coming back at me across the table. 7 years ago, your Dallas Cowboys played in their last Super Bowl. What? Stephen A. just looked and sounded so convincing on television that some people out there actually believed he won an occasional sports debate against me, which was ASA 9, ASA 10, ASA 11, maybe even ASA 23 in honor of Michael Jeffrey Jordan, greatest player ever in any sport. If we're just talking about telegenic, the ability to convince and captivate on TV, Stephen A. is actually a little more telegenic than President Trump is. President Trump was natural born telegenic. Stephen A. is a lot more telegenic than President Biden was or than President Obama was. Now, President Obama came across to me as extremely bright and poised and in control, but Stephen A. is quite frankly and clearly more dynamic on TV than President Obama was. So I say, if Arnold Schwarzenegger can be governor, Stephen A. can be president. If Jesse the Body Ventura and Sarah Palin and Al Franken can be governor, Stephen A. can be president. If former college football coach Tommy Tuberville can be a senator, then Stephen A. can be president. If Clint Eastwood and Jerry Springer and Sonny Bono can be mayor, Stephen A. can be president. If Cynthia Nixon and Clay Aiken and Antonio Sabato and George Takei can run for office, then so can Stephen A. My God. If Ronald Reagan, an actor who described himself as a political outsider, can get elected governor of California, then can get elected president of the United States, hey, Stephen A. can too. For that matter, exactly what real political experience did Donald Trump have before he got elected president twice? Twice. This is what I know about Stephen A. Smith. He has even more passion for politics than he has for sports. Trust me. I was always the sports fanatic who watched every single game, who lived and breathed sports, who ate and slept sports, who wouldn't know politics from the pollen count. Stephen A. closely followed politics and off camera got even more worked up about politics than he got worked up about sports on camera. Trust me. I will never forget that night back in, I believe this was 2008. Ernestine and I were on vacation in my hometown of Oklahoma City in our hotel room at the Oklahoma City Marriott on Northwest Highway. Stephen A. called. I think this was a Sunday night. Things hadn't worked out for him at ESPN. I don't know all the details, but he'd wound up working for Fox Sports Radio at that point. At that point, Ernestine was ready to go to dinner. She was hungry, but I waved to her. No, I need to talk to Stephen A. He wanted me to help him get back to ESPN, to the worldwide leader, which I eventually did with all my might. I knocked on a lot of top floor doors for my brother, Stephen A. Smith. But in that 2008 conversation, he told me how he'd made an appearance on The View. He told me about how he'd done some CNN shows. And I said to him, you know, you were born to be on a political show. That's your passion. That's your greatest expertise. That's the path you need to take. I told him on the phone that night from Oklahoma City. And he said something like, well, I'm known for sports. And I said, you can become known for politics. Of course, if at that moment you'd have told me Stephen A. one day would run for president of the United States, I'd have said at that point, yeah, right, I'll be the first man on Mars. Then I will never forget the party that Ernestine and I threw out here in our new place in Los Angeles just before I started on FS1. This would have been August of 2016. Stephen A. actually flew out and surprised me at that party. My new partner, Shannon Sharp, was also there, of course, that night. Now, I could be wrong, but I think that was the first time Stephen A. and Shannon ever met. That night ended with Stephen A. and Shannon going nose to nose about politics. Not about LeBron versus Jordan or if Tony Romo could ever take my Dallas Cowboys to a Super Bowl. No. Politics was the subject. To me, it was like they were speaking a foreign language. I tell you now what they were arguing about, but I honestly tuned them out at that moment, talked to other party guests. As Ernestine will tell you, I'm just not political, so I am not qualified to break down Stephen A.'s political qualifications or his beliefs or his platforms or whatever all that stuff is. All I can guarantee you is that he's knowledgeable, he's driven, he's very fair-minded, and he is on fire with making this country as great as he could ever make it. When I had Stephen A. on this show a few weeks back, you might remember, he made the point that he makes too much money at ESPN to run out the door and dive into politics. Yet, what I do know about running for president is that it takes way more money than even Stephen A. makes. So I'm hoping those Capitol Hill power brokers encouraging him to run for president have pockets deeper than the Potomac. Donald Trump always did. So look, if nothing ever comes of this, it'll still be great publicity for Stephen A. At least it will get a lot of people talking about and thinking about Stephen A. as a politician. Who knows, maybe it'll lead to his running for, I don't know, for senator from New York. But if I know Stephen A., he's thinking, I don't do senator, I run for president. It will not shock me if Stephen A. does run for president. It would not shock me if Stephen A. got elected president. Stephen A. Smith is the Michael Jordan of Telegenic. In today's America, that one gift just might prevail.